All right, so we can go ahead and get started with our writing prompts for the month. Very excited to conclude our sessions. In the last few months, we've been talking about Act 1 and Act 2. And today we are going to finish up by talking about what happens in Act 3 of our novels. So if this is your first time joining us for a write-in, welcome. Just to give you an idea of how the write-in works, we're going to go through just a short amount of teaching content up here at the top, and then we are going to dive into prompts related to our teaching topic. So our prompts today will all be about Act 3 of our stories. And then as we're working through those prompts, please feel free to write anywhere that suits you. So you can write on paper, you can write on your computer, you can write on, your kid if they're sitting next to you, wherever suits you and the people around you. Feel free to write there. And then we will have an opportunity to share our work in the chat. So you're more than welcome to share there, but it's not required if you would prefer not to. And when it comes to sharing, if you can make sure that you select to everyone from the drop-down menu, that will make sure everyone can see what you're sharing. And our main goal today is just to have fun and spark some curiosity about Act 3. So with all of that housekeeping taken care of, let's go ahead and dive in. So like I mentioned, today's focus is Act 3 of your novel. So what is Act 3 anyway? Well, Act 3 makes up about 25% of your story, and in a 3-act structure, it is the final act of your story. This is typically where you are going to resolve plot points and questions that you established earlier in your story, or potentially if you were working on a sequel or a series, it could also be where you pose a few new questions for the next book. So Act 3, again, typically about 25% of your novel, the final act in a 3-act structure. You are going to mainly wrap up loose ends and questions from throughout your story, though you may also pose a few new open-ended questions for the next story, though we want to make sure that you're not posing too many so that it feels unsatisfying for your readers. So what happens in Act 3? The beginning of Act 3 typically starts with a moment often known as the dark night of the soul. This moment is when your protagonist is struggling with their most challenging experience to date. This could be the antagonist they've been fighting the entire time has outwitted them. This could be they are trying to survive in the wilderness and all of their food has run out and a bear has come and taken away their stash. This could be when they have confessed their love and their love interest has told them that they're not interested, they've left them. Whatever the biggest challenge is, that typically kicks off Act 3. It's the most difficult challenge they've faced to date. It is not quite the climax yet, but it is the beginning, the most difficult challenge. And what that character learns from this experience is going to carry them through the climax of the story. So this dark night of the soul moment is going to be when they experience something incredibly challenging, but from that moment, they find these inner reserves of strength that they're going to take with them in order to defeat their demons or defeat whatever their challenge is at the climax. So that's where we start. We start with this really, really low point for your character. Then we go into the end of Act 3, which will end with the denouement or the dust settling. This is typically where the author, as the author, you're going to tie up your final loose ends, underscore the theme, fulfill any lingering promises to your reader. So we start at a very, very low point. We end by tying up our loose ends. And if we look at the full structure of Act 3, we typically have these 3 pieces. So we spoke about the pre-climax or the dark night of the soul. This is the moment when the protagonist is going to experience their most significant conflict to date, their most significant failure to date. This is typically going to increase the stakes for the actual climax. So say they are confessing or their love interest left them because they, were not treating them well. This is going to increase the stakes when they come back to their love interest at the climax and propose and say they've changed their ways, they're ready to love, whatever that is. So if they have if they're going to fight a villain at the climax, then at the pre-climax, they suffer a defeat from the villain, right? There's something that sets up the stakes of that climax even more by, again, forcing your protagonist to experience an incredibly significant challenge. So that's the first thing you need to include. Then you'll have the climax, which is the final moment of the overarching conflict. This is typically when the protagonist faces that challenge one more time and typically emerges victorious, though not always. This could be when they, show up to their love interest house with a boombox over their head, playing the playlist, confessing their love, and their protagonist, or excuse me, their love interest says, yes, I will be with you. It could be when they, meet their antagonist on the open battlefield and emerge victorious. It could be when they finally find the killer and they, try to apprehend them, right? Depending on what genre you're writing in, this will look a little bit different, but this is the final moment of that overarching conflict. It's where they're going to face a challenge one more time. And they're typically going to emerge victorious, that they could lose. And even if they emerge victorious, there are likely going to be some type of cost. Then we're going to end with the protagonist achieving their goal. And our final scenes are going to be you as a writer making sure you're tying up any loose ends and underscoring any themes for the story. So we've got these 3 parts that make up Act 3. So what does this look like in a story like The Wizard of Oz? So we have our pre-climax where on the wall on the way to the Wicked Witch's castle, Dorothy is captured. The witch finds out that the ruby slippers can't be taken against Dorothy's will while she's alive. So she sets an hourglass and threatens to kill Dorothy while it threatens that Dorothy is going to basically die when it runs out. So this is, again, the most significant and most dangerous challenge Dorothy has faced to date. It's setting up the stakes that happen in the climax. At the point of the climax, Dorothy throws a bucket of water to the scarecrow. She ends up dousing the witch, who melts into a puddle. Now, this moment is made all the more impactful because the witch has clearly shown that she wants to kill Dorothy during the pre-climax. So again, it ends up feeling much more significant at this point that Dorothy, is able to melt the witch. Then they hand the broom to Dorothy, and at the end, all of those loose ends are wrapped up. So we had all of these subplots about each of the characters in Dorothy's party. They all get the things that they needed. The Scarecrow gets their diploma, the Tin Man gets a heart, the Lion receives the Medal of Valor. Again, all of those subplots, all of those characteristics of each of those characters are wrapped up at this point. Then we discover that Dorothy has always had the power to return home. She goes home to lovingly greet her family. So at that final stage, all of those loose ends that we had are all wrapped up nice and neatly with a bow, and we send Dorothy back to Kansas to greet her family. So again, it's really important to think about the relationship between the pre-climax and the climax. Again, Dorothy killing the witch here takes on a lot more import because of what happens here, where the witch is significantly affecting their life. Yes, silver slippers in the book. Yeah, for sure. So again, the goal is to make sure that our pre-climax is directly related to the climax. And then again, here at the end, we are tying together all of those loose ends to make sure that the story, that anything that the reader is still asking questions about is answered at that point. All right, so with that being said, let's jump into exercises. So we have 4 brief exercises today. And our first is going to start by thinking about what we need to answer. So remember, in Act 3, our goal is going to be to answer any of the loose ends or questions that we have in our story. So to start, to warm up, I want you to think about all of the questions that you've posed or that your readers might still have that you have posed in Acts 1 or 2. So this can just be a brainstorm list. We will have 5 minutes to brainstorm a list, again, of all the questions that you are posing to your readers in Act 1 or Act 2, all the plot points that they might want to resolve. And again, you can write this in the chat. Make sure you select to everyone so we can all see it, or you can write it somewhere else if you would like. So our first 5 minutes are going to start now. All right. So that was our first 5 minutes. Usually we share at this point, but our next exercise is directly related to this one. So we'll share after we do our next one. So our next one is to take each of the questions that you have and then list how they will be resolved. So outline basically all the questions that you had, how will they be resolved in Act 3? And the goal will be to resolve most of them. So most outstanding things should have some type of resolution. And again, we don't obviously need to write scenes for all of these since we only have 5 minutes, but just a couple quick notes about how you hope to resolve these at the end of Act 3. So all of the questions that you took from last time, let's talk about how they're resolved in Act 3, and then we'll share as these are completed. So I will start our second 5 minutes now. All right. So now that we have gone through those, you can drop in the chat what your conflicts were and how they are resolved. And again, please make sure to select everyone from the drop down so that we can all see it. All right, so the first question is, does Artos really want to be king? It ends by he realizes he must be crowned king, that an alternative of council houses would be a disaster. Will he announce his betrothal to Elaine and lose Angel, who he knows is his true love? So he agrees to marry Elaine. So we have all of the conflicts resolved except for the sign of Duca, I believe, or Duca, and that is an open question for the sequel. So I love how we've resolved about 75% of the conflicts there. That's going to end up feeling super satisfying for readers, while again enticing them to code to the sequel as well. Nice work. Give everyone else another chance to drop. Okay, so we've got for Jack that Act 1, why is the main character, a detective with an alcohol problem? What caused him to be this? There's a climate disaster that causes flooding. Yes, he saved a young girl, his only family perished. So we learn about that in Act 3. Who's murdered Hilda, the leader of the neo-socialist group? What impact will this have? Then we learn about the impact on this that happens in Act 3. Is there another reason why the Prime Minister has requested himself to look into the murder? Again, we learned that they were hoping he would flail. Nice. Yeah, again, the goal is to resolve most of our prompts. Good work. Okay, so we start Act 3 by thinking and making sure that we have a good understanding of all of the loose questions we have so that we can then go into answering them. Next, our third prompt is going to be around that dark night of the soul. So remember, the dark night of the soul is going to relate to the final challenge your character must face. This is the most significant event, the most significant challenge they'll face up until this point. And at this point, we need to make sure that they are facing something that will directly correlate to the climax of the story. So it's either going to give them information about what they need for the climax, it's going to help them realize something about themselves, but overall, they're going to face a fairly significant failure here at this point, whether they're being met with rejection, whether they're losing a battle, whatever that is. So for this one, we are going to describe the kind of challenging events that your protagonist is going to face at this point during Dark Night of the Soul. And you can either summarize these events or you can start to write the scene here. So again, most significant, lowest point of the story up until this point, Dark Night of the Soul. All right, we'll have 10 minutes for this one, starting now. Okay, so we are going into our dark night of the soul. So I'd love to hear in the chat, what are the things that your protagonist is going to face at this dark night of the soul moment? And while you're adding those in, somebody had put into the Q&A that the protagonist, some of the questions that remain are: how will MA, the protagonist, survive the difficulties brought on her by the war, death of loved ones, raid on her home, hunger, poverty? They'll be resolved by the main character following or overcoming her grief at the death of her children and finding the strength to move on, standing up to the soldiers who raid her home, accepting that she needs to kind of let go of these material things and find ways to survive. And then they're going to go from reactive to active and facing the antagonist in the war, which is going to show some of that emotional maturity. It's very nice. Okay, so then we have at this dark night of the soul, same story all around them. The civil war has disintegrated their lives. They're facing hunger and poverty. Raids have made them feel safe. There's no, quinine. There's no malaria drugs available. The children are all sick and they're searching for the medicine without success. One of the daughters is gravely ill, and then they die en route to the hospital. So the character is facing defeat, depression, and grief. So this is a perfect example of a dark night of the soul, where basically all of this character's efforts to survive appear to have failed. They're just really struggling with depression and grief. Again, that lowest possible moment at that point. So for Jack, who is still planning the project, totally fine. Edgar, after working with the rookie, has found some sort of companionship. He's trying to get on the mend, and then something will plague him. He's detoxing from drugs and alcohol. He's really trying hard not to fall back into that life. He remembers the blank from his vacation, what happened a week ago. He is standing outside of school. He needs courage. He approaches the gate. He sees a girl. When he approaches her, he just wants to give her the toy. Basically, this is the story of kind of when he's losing his badge, right? So this is this moment where he realizes what's happened. He hears, he again has this really difficult thing, the loss of his income, the loss of his job. He is going to face public humiliation when the world starts to learn about his problems. So again, very, very clear dark night of the soul, very, very challenging for this character. So these are both great examples of what happens at this point. Again, it's the deepest struggle the character will possibly face. And again, we'll come into the climax, which has to directly relate to this. We have Artos and his three companions reaching what seems to be a dead end with no way to accomplish the hoped for goal at the Starstone Tower. So they're no further path forward. They've come all this way. There's nowhere else to go. So again, all of these are great examples of dark nights of the soul, the most challenging point your characters faced. For Steph, Milo has turned to detective work while hoping to find a solution. The antagonist offers Milo a key piece of the puzzle if he walks away. He talks himself into accepting the deal, and then he lies to his client that he hasn't found any information. And what is he going to do? Is he going to move forward or not? And all of these threads will then be resolved in our climax. So our final prompt for today is going to be to talk about the climax. So what events will they face at the climax, and will they emerge victorious? In most stories, the character will emerge victorious, or at least partially victorious, though they will have some cost. So they might lose a friend, though they overcome their battle with addiction, or they might win the war, though their best friend or partner dies. So at the climax, again, they're going to face a challenge, typically will emerge victorious, though they might face some severe consequences. And remember, our climax should almost always directly relate to that dark night of the soul. So what happened at that dark night of the soul, what we just outlined, that will make the events of the climax feel more consequential, okay? So it shouldn't be something totally separate in a totally different part of the world or a totally different part of the novel. This should be directly related to what we have just outlined in the dark night of the soul. So what did they learn at that point? What are they recovering from? What's going to happen at this stage to make them feel stronger? All right, so we will have 10 minutes. Similarly, you can either start to write the scene or outline this one, the events of the climax. starting now.